Welcome to this week's edition of the Belau Report. I'm Jane Belau. Historic preservation is an increasingly important part of our planning with all the other plans that are happening in Rochester. Our guest is Jeff Allman, who is the chairman of the Rochester Historic Preservation Commission. And Jeff, we welcome you.
Thank you.
You were appointed, what, a year and a half ago?
Yes.
And how do you feel about the progress?
Actually, it's been a really complicated task. People are intensely passionate about their history and their legacies. But we've actually had several great breakthroughs just here recently. One task we had was to create a list of what the group could determine was heritage preservation buildings. What are those that are unique to Rochester that really have the caliber to distinguish old buildings from important special buildings? Just actually this last week, the paid consultant that the city hired finished their report, and we're going to act on it tomorrow night and forward it to the city. Basically, something between 80 and 90% of all the old buildings are not recommended for further consideration for preservation treatment. And of those that are recommended, there will be a process that the owner can participate in subsidies and further what those treatments might be.
What did they use to distinguish an older building and a special older building? What made them discard, say, maybe 80% of them and just save 20 and say these are special? What made them special? The Federal National Park Service is the keeper of the National Historic Register, and they have articulated in long-standing what those criteria are. I believe there's 7 of them. They have to do with something important happened, like Ford Theater and John Wilkes Booth, or something's uniquely Historic.
excellent example of the workmanship or the period or the time or the architecture, something important to Rochester.
So they don't have to be registered on the National Registry for you to consider them. In fact, maybe most of them aren't.
I believe there are about a dozen in Rochester that are on the National Register. In addition, the Pill Hill Historic District over by the Plummer House has 134 houses that are considered to be contributing members of that historic district.
Now, when you say there's a lot of interest in historic preservation, does that stop when it's one of your buildings? I mean, when a person, do they say, I think it's wonderful that we're going to have historic preservation, but I don't want my building historic? Is that sort of the attitude, or are they supportive of even their own buildings?
Oh, I think many historic buildings are a boutique legacy of people's favorite concern. For example, Dr. Henry Plummer's wife Daisy donated the Plummer House to the city, I believe in 1965, and it's belonged to the public via the park department for all these years. It's had a unique public-private partnership of master gardeners helping with the grounds. It got a state grant last year to replace the boilers. It's a good example of a building that's seen 100 years of good use.
When you talk about this list that the consultants provided, before you send it to the council, will you be editing it and saying, oh, they forgot this building, or this is not quite so important, or will you just send the report to the council and see what the council says?
It's the will of the committee, of course, or commission. We haven't in the past, and the reason has been that the paid consultants did a fairly thorough, exhaustive research of the information that was available from the County Planning and Zoning Department, the Olmsted County History Center, and some other sources at the State Minnesota History Center.
That leaves
Now,
you.
now, in addition, my vision of how this would work was that any owner of a building that he thinks qualifies would have an application and vetting process that they could, as new information comes to light, as people get interested enough to do the research, there will be some come and go from the list.
About how many homes and businesses are in the, is it 10 or 15%? They said, they discarded like 80% as not special. How many roughly are we talking?
We had the consultant look at, I believe it was 245 buildings in the central business district that were over 45 years old. The benchmark's 50, and we decided that 45 was close enough to the benchmark that we wanted to treat them in case we didn't get back to update the list again in the next 5 years. Of that, about a dozen were already on the National Historic Register, such as the Plummer Building or the Foundation House at Mayo. A number of other ones were candidates for National Register nomination, like Falwell School. There were another 30 or 40 that were candidates for further study, but they had yet to be, their story had yet to be told. And then there were about 150 or 175 that there were no records and no street level example why they should be subject to preservation restrictions.
And are they all over the city, or are they located in the heart of the city, over at St. Mary's? Is there a district that has a greater concentration of potential historic sites?
Well, we concentrated on the commercial buildings in the central business district because that seems to be where the big demolition and reconstruction action is likely. One of the themes that you'll hear over and over is you want to save old buildings from demolition. And the counterpoint to that is that old buildings in prime sites frequently are under pressure to be hired in better uses. So, for example, Titan Development's property at CJ's Bar on the corner of Center Street and Broadway, there's 3 two-story small storefronts that are old, and the proposal is a new 28-story building on that site. The land's just too valuable for the current use. The city's ordinance also described not only what was important about the place, but it had to also be in a state of repair that was amenable to economic feasible reuse. The council determined that CJ's and the former Jenny's Fabric and those places were not, and they authorized a demolition permit.
Yeah. See, that's a tough standard to meet, though, to say, well, we'll preserve it unless it's more valuable doing something else, or there's a higher and a better use, or it's a 2-story building versus a 30-story building. That's very hard to beat, isn't it?
They are. Another passionate one was the Chardonnay, who had gone from a bed and breakfast to 3 different restaurants. As I understand it, there was a contract for deed for an owner that had a balloon payment where the payment came due, and the owner's testimony to the city council was that between the $500,000 of remodeling cost and the $500,000 land value, that $1 million investment couldn't be economically managed with a small restaurant and 3 apartments. So it fell to the wrecking ball.
Now, you either arrived with renewed vigor in the historic preservation in just the nick of time, or you're feeling steamrolled by Destination Medical Center. Which is it? Both?
Oh, I think that's actually a great opportunity for Rochester. I think it will generate enough economic engine to drive great new investments. And personally, this has turned into one of my major career interests. Having purchased and remodeled now 19 of these kind of buildings, and personally owned 7 National Historic Register properties. I'm an ardent. I consider myself an ardent preservationist, but
Oh, yeah.
but I would also say that that responsible economic development also plays a big part. I remember the Damon Parkade before the Gonda building was there. That was an easy one for me. The Gonda building's a wonderful addition to the community.
And the Damon Parkade was just another ramp, right?
Well, no, but I mean, it was tired. As I recall, it was the oldest structure of its kind. The salt had migrated through the rebar and the concrete. It was a very difficult. Some buildings you just can't keep in use forever either.
How does Rochester rate as interest in historic preservation compared to, say, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Duluth? They've all got commissions.
Yeah. In my professional work, I've worked in a number of jurisdictions: Red Wing, Faribault, Lanesboro. I would put Rochester probably in the middle. But what's a little different about Rochester is the economic vitality of Rochester. We don't have very much vacancy on our main streets the way some of our surrounding towns are. So it brings these to the fore more directly. I've been involved a little bit for probably 15 years with what to do with the Casson School, and it's been a real struggle. And ultimately,
Are you talking about Lourdes?
No, the Casson.
The Casson.
Casson School, and after about 15 years and several court battles, the preservationists managed to come up with $250,000 to buy it, but they've yet to proceed on the remodeling. So these are hard tasks, and they take government participation usually to subsidize their reuse.
Do you feel that the Rochester city government is committed to historic preservation?
Oh yeah, sure. The devil's always in the details. I mean, they created a commission. Randy Staver and I were both chairs of the prior entity, the Historic Preservation Committee. It's been claimed that Ardell Brady has gone on record with pretty strong opinions about the Barnes & Noble store.
Chateau Theater?
Yeah, the Chateau Theater. I think they care intensely, but they're also thoughtful guardians of the public trust and the public dollar. They're elected commissioners themselves, and they have to determine what's really the will of the people. We just last Friday we completed a survey where we asked everybody we could ask 27 questions about just what did they think was the proper role of government and private ownership. And we plan to act on that. We'll be publishing that shortly. But basically, the public wants people to own historic buildings themselves, but they also want their government to help them own it. They do not want the government to go buy every old building. But they also don't want every building owner to try to carry the maintenance of the old properties by themselves.
That'll be interesting when you can put those together with the list that the consultants brought of the buildings and see how you come out with cross-checking, you know, and saying they feel both ways. They want the historic preservation, they want to own it, but they want government help. And we don't have any money, right, for that yet?
I think we in the commission we came up with, I believe, 16 potential sources of funds, from as simple as preferential property tax treatment or tax abatement districts to special rebates from the utility company, who already have rebate programs. I'm optimistic that if we can get a manageable number of properties on the list, we'll be able to work up custom funding mechanisms to help them.
What's your time frame for your list of properties?
We're planning to act on the consultants list tomorrow at the February 24th, and we're probably going to have 2 hearings about the survey results, the first of which is also tomorrow. And I would think that we would have a report back to the City Council before summer. Now their plan was that we would digest a list and pre-vet some of these short lists, and then the council would conduct their own public hearings and get their own testimony and make some determination how to follow through.
Tell our viewers about the makeup of the commission. How many members, and are they mostly architects, builders, public people, what?
Well, the mayor nominated the 11-member panel, and the City Council unanimously approved them. As I think to go around the table, there's one that's a president of a general contractor firm, there's one that's a real estate attorney, there's one that's a vice president of the biggest property management firm in town. I'm the chair, you know, as an experienced preservationist and consulting engineer. We have some other people that I would describe as lay public that are not in the construction business or real estate business. So it was intended to represent a diverse part of the community.
When the college apartments were raised, were you in business as a historic preservation commission at that time, or was that appointed afterwards?
It was a committee, not a commission.
Okay.
Another one of those details, many times there are, just like you'd have in litigation, there's expert witnesses and studies, both pro and con, on the same building. It's my understanding that there were architectural feasibility studies to keep the college apartments, and there were other studies to not keep it, and some of those even get tested in court. The Soldier Field pool house was a Harold Crawford design, a local architect from around World War I, and there were studies both pro and con to demolishing that, and ultimately they did demolish it. And the Historic Preservation Committee, the precursor, actually took the city to court, got an injunction, and then filed an appeal. And in both cases, the city prevailed, although the appeal was a split decision.
So, Destination Medical Center has shown drawings of 5 districts, I believe, and they're very modern, and there's ice skating rinks, and there's trails, and there's apartments along the river, and it looks very, I don't want to say Disney-esque, but like built from scratch. what is the role of the historic buildings within this plan for Rochester? Because a lot of people say we don't want to lose the character of Rochester, our small businesses and the friendliness of the people. And what is the role that historic preservation would play in that? And I know the Chateau Theater is already talked about frequently as something that just can't disappear.
My belief is that these things happily coexist. But they have to find economic use. I mean, ultimately, it's the nature of American government that free enterprise and private ownership has a way to advance itself. I own one of those type of buildings, the residence of Old City Hall. This is a 1931 building, and it's like all buildings, it's continually under pressure, where the land is more valuable without the building than with it. It's going to take some leadership by the city council to decide what to do. But my understanding is today there is not eminent domain. The government does not have law in place to direct the private owner very strongly, and the one statute that's used in the common litigation is called the Minnesota Environmental Rights Act, and it's not been a very strong tool for preserving buildings.
But not for preserving them, but for acquiring them, it has, right? They've used it a few times at least in the last 30 years.
Wow, that was the statute they cited for the Soldiers Field Pool House. It was 3 buildings in Red Wing. It was the one for the Conley House in Kutsky Park. That's litigation still underway. It gets complicated.
This whole thing is complicated, right? The question that comes to mind, like Mr. Kriesel will tell you with respect to antiques, the new generation is not quite as cognizant about value of old things or collections of things or large houses with lots of stuff in them than the previous generations. It seems like each one is getting more efficient as they get older. You finding that's true also with historic preservation?
Oh, I think there's mixed precedent on that. I was on the board of directors of the Preservation Alliance of Minnesota for 6 years, and one of our core constituencies were college students from the University of Minnesota. They always were high participants in our programs, and just this last Saturday they did a thing they call heart bombing, where they put Valentine's hearts all over some log cabins that were an important part of 1940s Rochester on South Marion Road. So, I mean, the energy and enthusiasm of youth is always there.
Until they bump up against the regulations that say this is not the highest and best use.
Oh, I don't know. You gave me this question in advance, and I'm thinking back to when I was a youth, and I remember the protests on Vietnam, and I don't know. This is not as hot an issue as that was.
Yeah. So if you were to look at Rochester in 5 years, what would you like to see standing in the downtown business district? I realize that's going to come out of your survey, and you'll be reporting to the public on that in about a week or so.
Oh, I think excellent creative adaptive reuses. are inspiring. I think bringing out the best of the old in new ways that make it attractive. I think the tap house is a great example of a reuse of that building that was once a haberdashery and a cigar manufacturing plant, I understand. I've not seen what's going on at Sante, the former Sante. I don't even know the new name of it, but I expect something inspiring from those people. So, it should be a mix of old and new.
That's 3rd Street Southwest, historic 3rd Street Southwest. And it seems to me there are a number of older brick buildings there that look like they would be heritage kind of property.
They could be. The street bar, Half Barrel, just did some major remodeling, and in my opinion, it blends with the neighborhood, although it's not an authentic, restoration, and they downsized the windows and a number of those kind of things. I think it's a harmonious use with the neighborhood.
And Broadway, the old Payne furniture and those buildings along there?
I don't know. I don't know. I own 3 of those buildings on that block.
Oh, so you can
for 10 years. I sold 12 years ago. But what do you keep and what don't you? It's a delicate act.
We only got 3 minutes left. And what is your immediate goal besides getting the survey out, having a hearing on what the findings were from the consultants? What's your immediate goal with the Heritage Preservation Commission as the chairman?
Well, I have several. First, I would. This has been a painful, bitter process for some of the real strong activists, and I would like us to, the commission, to offer a succinct, reasonable, responsible summary that gives the city council a way to proceed. And second, I would like the city council to fund assisting some of these buildings, because with funding they're likely to succeed. And
lastly, how do you bring the disparate groups, and I say the more aggressive people who want to retain the character at any expense, and then those that are more moderate, and those that are almost not giving up but are very practical? How do you bring them together?
Well, I think we first respect our own hubris. Some things are not within our control. There's federal and state and local statutes that we are expected to comply with, and some of these are national and international issues. I went to the national convention in Savannah, Georgia, and everybody there was faced with many of these same issues. So it won't please everybody, and the fringes, both pro and con, probably won't get their way. But our survey actually has great information.
Okay. Now, for our viewers, are these meetings open to the public, and when's the next one? After tomorrow, is it? Today?
Yes, we've typically been the 3rd Tuesday of the month. The next one is tomorrow. They are listed on the city website. You can get our meeting minutes and information packets.
Do you have a website?
Yeah, it's on the city website.
All right,
HPC
the City
has
of
a website.
Rochester.
Yes.
Because we have lots of little communities that
Yeah.
also are part of the cable program. Jeff Allman, Chair of the Rochester Historic Preservation Commission. Thank you, and we'll talk to you again as these surveys come out and as DMC becomes more specific as to what they're looking at, to see if what they're looking at is what you're looking at. But thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
All right. Thank you, our viewers, for your interest. We'll be with you again next week, same time, same channel. In the meantime, have a very good week and have a very good night.